So in this video, I wanted to talk about volume 1 of I got a cheat skill in another world and became unrivaled in the real world too. And the reason why I wanted to get into this light novel just was for a number of different reasons. One, it piqued my interest because of the difference between what other isekais have done and how this tries to do a different kind of spin to it, and I'll get into that in a minute. But also I wanted to just look at the difference between the light novel and the anime, because there are always going to be little differences, whether big or small, depending on the different series, and there are definitely some noticeable differences in episode 1. Of course, only episode 1 is out currently, so I can't compare to other episodes until they actually come out, and I'll probably do those videos and talk about things like that each episode that comes out on the main channel. But I also wanted to check this out because one thing that I like about different isekais is when they try to do something different. They don't just copy paste the complete isekai formula, because the normal isekai formula is office worker transported to an alternative world, whether through truck-con or just some form of teleportation, goes to sleep at work and suddenly teleports, ends up suddenly half their age and picks up a bunch of girls, and there's no real callback to the past life. It's very much of a kind of a default easy self-insert. Now with this one, I'm sure some people could see this as a self-insert, but for me, I think what was interesting is that it kind of reminds me of a mix between Jobless Reincarnation, Shield Hero, and a visual novel that I've forgotten the name of, but it just kind of the one aspect of the main protagonist being put into a new prestige school reminded me of a visual novel that had some similar traits, where the main protagonist helps a girl out in the street that's kind of been harassed by a bunch of thugs, and then ends up leading to him end up getting accepted into a prestige sort of higher up school of rich aristocrat kind of kids, or just richer upper class kids. But in that visual novel it was an all girls school, but in this one it's a mix between girls and boys, so little differences. But I noticed that it kind of felt like Shield Hero with the game mechanic systems and the levels and the gear and just the stat system, but nowhere near as in depth as Shield Hero. Shield Hero has a lot more game mechanics built into it. And then Jobless Reincarnation, because of some of the similarities to his past and how he was bullied severely, though different types depending on the spectrum, because he got bullied by his family and the school, while Rudy was bullied by the school and the trauma that it did to him. And it's done in a different way, which I think is also interesting as well. The fact that it also looks at the isekai world and then the past world and how he balances between the two, I think is interesting. But I do feel like some people will be put off by this series and this light novel just because of the fact that it does go from that kind of like really bad life, he's living life really bad, constantly being bullied, really down in the dumps, and then suddenly gets a brand new body, superpowers, has a bunch of girls chasing him. He's gone from 0 to just 10, and even beyond that very quickly. I mean, he's even got like people chasing him to become a model. A bunch of girls are already interested in him. He's made a bunch of new friends. Even at the end of this volume, he's kind of almost reconciled a little bit with his siblings, which, to be honest, the fact that he forgave them, so I wouldn't say he forgave them, but the way he put it was that even though, yes, they've done some horrible things to him, he still sees them as family. And clearly there might be some mending of bridges over time in that sense, but I do feel like some people will see this as a little bit too good to be true kind of story, which is understandable, that criticism. But at the same time, I don't go into an anime or a light novel or a manga expecting everything to be pristine perfect. Though I do try to expect some grounded realisticness when it comes to characters in the sense of how they respond to different situations. It just depends. I mean, there's no real like simple rule structure that I have. It's kind of very flexible, and you kind of have to be when it comes to these kind of stories. But the story does pique my interest, and I do really enjoy it just because of those aspects. And I might continue reading the light novels and talking about them on the channel just because I'm genuinely interested in them, and having a bit of break from other light novels is always nice to do as well. So for me personally, that's what's interesting, but I can definitely understand why some people might notice as the episodes come out, or if they read the first volume, they may be a bit turned off. I've seen some people kind of have digs at it because of that, the fact that apparently it focuses too much on the attraction component. I don't notice any fixation on the looks component, but I guess when he kind of bumped into a girl in the store and then ended up doing a bit of a model shoot, of course in model situations and when you're in those kind of magazines, yes, people are going to fixate on your attraction. Though definitely I do notice that when he walks out into the real world now, a lot of people do fixate on his attraction. But then at the same time, when I look at other mangas like, say, like Rent-a-Girlfriend, there's a lot of fixation on attractiveness for the main girl that's the love interest, but I don't see anyone criticizing that. And I think it's because it's the main male protagonist rather than the main, well, a female character in a different story. So that might be why, maybe, I don't know. I'd definitely love to know other people's thoughts. But the general premise and how the story goes is basically main protagonist has inherited a bunch of money from his grandfather. He is living a pretty miserable life. He's getting ready to go back to school and he's getting bullied, beaten, and he ends up throwing his frustration at a mirror, and it ends up leading to a door unlocking to a back room. He finds a door, he goes to a different world, and he's basically just got a bunch of stuff there. He inherits his house, this sage itself. I still think the sage is his grandfather, but I'll clearly find out more as the volumes go on. But he gets a bunch of gear, a bunch of weapons, he gets some decent power-ups and some titles or sort of skills or passives that allow him to gain a big leg up in the anime, because the anime didn't translate, or Crunchyroll didn't do the subs for the text boxes straight away when the episode came out. I didn't get to see those, but when reading the light novel, I got to see what a lot of those text boxes mean, the items, all that kind of stuff. You can see why he became super overpowered very quickly. He got a bunch of titles that gave him a massive leg up, he got a bunch of equipment, he got a bunch of gear, he got a house handed to him. The house has a bunch of rare herbs, it's got a shield around it, the area is riddled in high level monsters, but he can attack from inside a bubble that's safe. So he was able to get a lot of like big power-ups very quickly, so definitely fits that main overpowered protagonist. I mean, it's in the actual title itself. I got a cheat skill in another world and became unrivaled in the real world too. So the title is very self-explanatory. I mean, if you go into it shocked that he's overpowered, then it's kind of like, it is in the title. So I feel like that's a bit of a bad excuse to hate on it if you're going into it with that title, with that reasoning. But he gets all that. The thing that I saw it as was that the fact is, I still do believe the sage that he refers to is his grandfather. That's just my opinion until I read more, but I kind of saw it as like he was inheriting his past family members' legacy in the sense of like his gear and equipment and all that kind of stuff, and so he was able to get a bit of a leg up. It's like when you go into a game and you're able to buy like those booster packs, or basically pay to win sort of booster packs that give you a leg up. Like you're paying your way to the top. In this sense, he's been given it by someone else that lived there. So that's the way I saw it. Whether people like that or not, just depends. But he gains a pretty big leg up. I mean, he kills one level 300 monster, gets 100 levels, gets a bunch of stats. The stats are pretty well rounded. He notes on that. That's why I kind of feel like it's a bit like Shield Hero with all the stats and the levels and stuff. And he even notes that it's the weapons and the gear are super overpowered. He also does do things a little bit different compared to the anime to the light novels. So in the anime, it's kind of ordered a little bit more, like they kind of don't focus on the Isekai world as much. They kind of focus on the real world first and establishing that, while in the light novels, he spends a little bit more time in the Isekai world. So he, of course, we know about all the cooking, the gardening, all that kind of stuff, but he does go explore a little bit and ends up saving a princess and then kind of retreats, and then that princess ends up going out and looking for him again in this wilderness kind of area where it has a bunch of high level monsters, which is why it's kind of isolated, no one really wants to go into, because it's super high level monsters that no one really wants to fight. So clearly the sage was very powerful. To build a shield like that, clearly he was in a league of his own. The one thing that was shuffled around was in the anime, they through the whole him getting beaten up at the school, and then he ended up helping that girl at the corner store, where he then also got then beaten up as well, and he ended up leaving, going home, and then punching the window. But in the light novels, he actually goes to the Isekai world after being beaten up at the school, gets a little bit more of a bit of a buffed body, but not noticeably in the sense of visually noticeable. He just gets a little bit stronger, and then he goes to the corner store and then gets beaten up, but then he notes at the corner store that he should have been hurt much more, but he wasn't. So there's a bit of a shuffle round of different events. I can understand why they're probably wanting to smooth some of those things out, make it a little bit more easier to kind of digest. You got to realize information dumping. I know some people really want heaps of information dumped in the first episode, but if you over information dump, then people just feel overwhelmed. And especially since there's a bunch of text boxes as well that now have been translated, that adds on to it as well, so you kind of got to pause and read them as well. So it does feel like it's probably best to not overwhelm completely. So I feel like the pacing's done deliberately to allow people to get into it a little bit easier. It doesn't change the core aspect of the story, just allows for different pacing that probably work better from an anime format. So if at the end of the day you want the pure experience, I would just recommend going to the actual light novels itself, but I think the anime does a decent job. After all that, he ends up getting accepted into a prestige school because he goes back to the school. The girl rocks up and basically offers him, hey, you helped me, my father wants to offer you something as a reward, and he gets offered to go to this prestige school as a reward because this girl has looked into him. The girl that was at the corner store that was being harassed, clearly a wealthy girl that probably should have had bodyguards, but she wanted to live a normal life. She offers him a chance at going to this high prestige school that only accepts certain people. His two other siblings are there demanding that they be accepted, and she's like, no, I did my background check on you and you are cruddy people. You've mistreated him poorly, so you're not getting in. So they don't take that well. Not at all, because later on they end up joining up with a bunch of thugs and attacking the school, and that leads to them almost getting beaten up as well by the very same thugs that they wanted to did recruit, but his brother ends up saving them. So that's what I meant about, like, there's some reconciling. He still protects them even though they've done what he's done, and he even notes on that because even other people are like, you kind of protected the very people that have been torturing you, but he has this sense of honor of being like, their family. He feels like he still needs to protect them as well. So the one thing is that when he goes from the life of his past life at school to the new life, it's a very much of a kind of a jarring effect. Everyone treats him nicely. Everyone's super sort of welcoming, easygoing. A lot of the girls are interested in him attractively. The guys are all super chill. But the one thing that he does know is that he feels like they're just generally good people as well, because some of them aren't like super like attractive, like cool kid style things. Some of them are kind of like nerdy style, a little bit more like scrawnier, softer, and so it feels like they are just generally good people. So he feels a lot more welcome, like they feel genuinely good to the core, rather than just being like, oh, they're only nice to him because he's suddenly attractive now. Because the one thing he does note to the girl that offers him into the prestige school is like, hey, I was fat, all the rest, and she's like, she didn't really know. She's like, yeah, I knew it was you because of the eyes. Because he goes, well, how did you recognize me? Because I went from super overweight to this completely different person. I look completely different. She's like, not really. Your eyes still look the same. That gentle eyes that you had before and now are still the same. So I think it's a nice little touch, but at the same time, I'm sure some people will be like, oh, no, it's not believable. But I do feel like if you watch the anime, you can kind of, like, for me, when I saw it and the main protagonist kind of kept referring to himself as ugly, as being overweight, I was kind of like, he's not ugly, he's just a bit meatier. Like, his face or his eyes are kind of nice. Like, he's got nice eyes and everything. And I think that's one thing the anime does a really good job at, is making the eyes look really nice, and the art style. So maybe it's just the art kind of made it look really good, but the girl notes on that is that the eyes kind of felt gentle from his past to his current. So it feels like she just generally wanted to do a good deed to him for what he did, and so her father lets him do a day trial because he wasn't sure. He does a day trial, he accepts it, and the one thing is that even though he's got the cash out from the Isekai world to the real world, he has all his tuitions paid for, and the meals and everything are super cheap, so he's got a pretty easy life going for him. And then there's also other stuff that happens in the actual volume itself that I'll talk about on the main channel as the episodes come out. But there's an interesting relationship and story development going on between another girl that he meets when he's going shopping looking for clothes, because clearly he's going to need new clothes now, and he bumps into this girl that was doing photography, and he ends up getting asked to temporarily join into for some photography because the other guy didn't turn up and he was a bit of a sleazebag. And that's where he ends up getting kind of scouted, and a bunch of people see it in the magazine, so he becomes very famous very quickly. So going from a sort of normal school to a prestige school, suddenly getting into a magazine for models, he's going from a very much of a bottom life that he hated to very much a celebrity lifestyle. So I can see why some people might see it as a bit weird and jarring, but personally, I just like the difference in how it's trying to do the story, rather than it just being like teleported, that's it, it's a new life, you're only in that world. It's a balance between the two. And I've seen some people say, well, why doesn't he just only spend his time in that isekai world? And even the main protagonist notes on that. But for me, I don't think it would work because of how the door works. If he ends up just completely disappearing, that house would end up, well, he would end up being put as missing, he'd be presumed as dead, and so the house would be sold, and then someone else would buy the house, and then there's a chance that someone could discover that back room as well. And I feel like someone would end up discovering it if they look at the blueprints, or they try and work out the room structure and everything, and they find that back room, and then someone else will find that door. So it ends up leading into kind of like a Pandora's box of multiple people finding that room. So it's probably smart that he probably balances between the two lives. So I do find the story interesting. I'd love to know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Definitely probably going to look at continue reading. Love to know your thoughts. If you would like me to, probably will, but still love to know people's opinions. Of course, if you like this video, hit the like, subscribe, and I'll see you beautiful nerds in the next video.